Alrighty, we'll say it ain't so. Joe Biden, that is, the current vice president, managing to tick off the former vice president today, big time. Here's part two of my sit-down with Dick Cheney.
Biden was making news today, speaking to a union group, saying we have to rebuild the middle class, and the way to do that is to help labor unions grow. What'd you make of that?
Well, I'm not anti-labor union. I carried a ticket for 6 years in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in my youth. I built power line, transmission line all over Wyoming, Utah, Colorado. That's how I paid for my education. So I'm not anti-union. I do think the legislation that the administration's supporting and that the unions are pushing hard, the so-called card check law, would do away with a secret ballot in terms of the question of organizing unions. I think it would be a huge mistake. I don't think we want to get into the business where we make it easier for there to be the kind of intimidation that we've sometimes seen in these operations in the past, and where people wouldn't be able to cast a secret ballot in terms of whether or not they want to join a union.
Jack Welch said they would be deleterious to our economic recovery. Do you agree?
Well, I always felt that what Ronald Reagan did back in 1981 in the early part of his administration, when he was very tough with the air traffic controllers, was a good, sound, solid move. I think that, as I say, that if people want to join a union, fine. That's their business. There are provisions for that allow unions to be represented. But I think what the unions are trying to do here is dramatically expand the base in terms of membership, and they will in turn generate vast sums of money in terms of dues and political contributions. And I think it does have wide-ranging ramifications, and that the current system where we have secret ballots for people to decide whether or not they want to be represented by unions, a good way to go. We ought to preserve it.
You mentioned Ronald Reagan, sir, and Jeb Bush made some news recently saying that the party, and a paraphrase here, obsesses a bit too much about Ronald Reagan and has got to move on and move forward. What do you make of that?
Well, I like Jeb. I think he's a good man. I'd like to see him continue to stay involved politically.
For president?
I'd probably support him for president. I think
Would you really?
He's a good man.
Over Mitt Romney?
I'm not endorsing anybody today.
Any candidate you like?
I'm not in the business of endorsing anybody at this point, Neil. But I'm a big fan of Jeb's. I think in terms of the Reagan legacy, I think it's important to the party. I think it was a period of time when we had an administration that understood that the engine that drives the American economy is the private sector. That one of the things that was most important from the standpoint of government was to get out of the way of the private sector and let small businesses grow and develop and create jobs and create wealth. You had to reduce the tax burden to the maximum extent possible. Exactly the opposite of the kind of policies we see coming out of the administration today, when we're experiencing a proposal for a vast increase in the power of the government over the private sector.
But without, any regard for party, it started with your administration, right? I mean, the bailout, the financial bailouts of the banks, and looking to help the auto companies in very dire economic moments, certainly, was started by you and President Bush.
Well,
do you regret any of that?
I disagreed with bailing out the automobile companies. I would have encouraged the process to go forward for Chapter 11. I thought that was the right way to go. The banks are different. And the reason the banks are different is because they're part of the financial system that is the heart and soul of our economy. And the federal government has major responsibilities for the health of our financial institutions. You've got the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the FDIC, SEC, etc. And when the markets began to seize up, when people couldn't get credit anymore, when the collapse, for example, of the subprime mortgage market and so forth put at risk the basic fundamental health of our economy because it threatened that core of our financial system. And there isn't anybody other than the federal government that can fix it. And therefore we felt we had no choice.
But they're still in shaky shape, right? After all the money we spent,
shape, but they're
maybe had we let bankruptcy like you recommended for the auto companies be applied to the banks?
Not for the banks.
Really?
I really think that would have been a serious
what
problem.
Did you see? Can you say now what did everyone see that was going to be so horrific?
Well, when we'd have the Secretary of the Treasury or the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve come in and say we've got a major crisis on our hands, and within 48 hours major financial institutions are going to go down in flames. Or that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that dominated the mortgage market out there were suddenly in trouble financially because of the collapse of the subprime mortgage
But you
market.
must have seen where that was going, right? What you do for one, all expected, and then it's an expectations game, right?
Right, but again, I think you've got to, and we've got to make a distinction about the financial sector because it is different than the other parts of the economy. The other parts of the economy can't function without a strong financial sector, without credit, without sound monetary policy, and actions by the government and the Federal Reserve to establish and maintain the value of our currency.
But now we've got a president, a government, dictating salaries at these institutions' rescue, which I guess happens if you take taxpayer dollars, and dictating their very business, right? Is that right?
Well, the thing I find objectionable is that people are taking what was done with respect to the financial sector and without discriminating, trying to do the same thing for a broader range of sectors. And,
do you think it
I
went
think
too
that's
far?
a mistake.
I
think so. I would have kept it focused on the financial institutions. But I worry that the current situation is a set of circumstances where the administration is using the excuse of the economic difficulties in order to significantly broaden the power and authority of the government over the private sector, and I think that's a huge mistake.
There's a Wall Street Journal story that has it that the president's tax hikes actually go in to those earning $235,000, not $250,000. What do you think of that?
I haven't seen the story, but I worry. I don't see any way you can do what he's trying to do in terms of the vast expansion of governmental programs and a huge federal deficit and major tax increases without the kind of tax increases that are going to hit virtually every American.
Do you think it stops at 39.6%?
I'm afraid it won't, not if you go with a government of the size and scale that the administration apparently envisions.
What do you envision it will ultimately get to?
Well, I'd much prefer a situation in which we did not embark upon a course of the vast expansion of the authority of the federal government over the private sector. I'd be much more focused on tax cuts and reducing the economic burden on the private sector that the federal government represents is the best way to get the economy up and running again. I think you need to create jobs, you need to support small business, you need to encourage people to go out and save and invest and to create the kind of entrepreneurial activity that really has given us the greatness that is the American economy, not expand the size of the federal government.
Finally, Mr. Vice President, many have urged the Republican Party to moderate, to get more mainstream, to do what Democrats did at the time of Bill Clinton in the late 80s into 92, become more palatable to a wider section of the population. What do you say?
I think we need to run a party that is broadly based, where people of a wide variety of viewpoints are welcome. I don't think we ought to change the basic fundamental philosophy of the Republican Party. I personally am a conservative Republican. I obviously believe in my philosophy, and I think that's the basis upon which we have to build any resurgence of our party. I think we will, but I think we'll do it by being true to our principles, not becoming more like the Democrats.
So you don't think you'd isolate Republicans going your route?
No.
Mr. Vice President, thank you very, very much.
Pleasure as always, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.